wonderful people. Welcome back to our talks for today. My name is Jenna, and I am an exhibit interpreter here with the San Antonio Zoo's Education Department. Today, we are joining our Caribbean flamingos. So, you might be aware that today's scheduled talk was originally supposed to be for the okapi. However, when it is cold here in San Antonio, so usually anything below 60 degrees, we give our okapis the choice to stay inside, which they're usually going to take because they're from the Congo. It's very warm. They're not used to these cold temperatures. We want our animals to be as comfortable as possible. So rather than talk to you about okapi diet, to an empty habitat, I thought it would be better to switch the talks this week, switch our schedule around for this week, and talk about flamingos now and okapis next weekend. So do stay tuned for that. It's supposed to be much warmer in San Antonio next weekend, so we can visit our okapis hopefully. But today we're going to talk about our flamingos because cold weather doesn't bother them as much, and a big reason behind that is the fact that they have a warm, giant pool of warm water for them available at all times of day. It's going to be kept at about 70 degrees. So the only times that the cold weather is going to bother our flamingos is if for any reason our water temperature regulating system is down, which did happen last February during the freeze and was really the only part of the zoo that lost power. And the restaurant, you can't, we have parts of the screen, obviously blurred out so that we're not exposing guests. But right here, if you can kind of see, you see the umbrella there, the red umbrella is behind that is a restaurant called Riverview. And that is actually where some of our flamingos had to live for a few days last year during the freeze because we couldn't keep their water warm because of that loss of power. That was the only area in the zoo that did lose power, so we were very grateful for that. But on colder days like today, most of our flamingos are going to prefer staying in the water. And it's really cool what they're doing right now, though. I've noticed I've kind of been keeping an eye on the camera throughout the day, and it's almost mating season, so it's going to get warmer soon. They know that. So we are seeing a lot of kind of courtship displays going on. So lots of this head flapping, raising of the neck, head flapping, followed by, of course, sort of the wing flapping. So do keep an eye out for that. It's going to be, it's very cool to see. There it is, that wing flap. Our flamingos know what they're doing. So this is about the time of year that individual flamingos that aren't already paired up are gonna start trying to find their mates, and then within a few weeks we'll eventually see everyone kind of walking in pairs, which is really exciting. So talking about flamingo diets, obviously flamingo diet is a very, very unique conversation to be having because it's their diet that contributes to their unique physical appearance, which, as we know, flamingos are famous for their pink colorization. So these guys, Caribbean flamingos, Caribbean or American flamingos, whichever term you prefer, both are acceptable as their common name, are going to be the sort of brightest corally, orangey, pinky color. They're going to be the flamingos that inspired the plastic lawn flamingos. And when we think of flamingos and that very famous color, it's mostly going to be a depiction of the American or Caribbean flamingo. Other flamingo species are much more of a bubblegum pink or pastel pink, much lighter in color. And that doesn't kind of correlate at all with health between the different species. It's entirely a matter of the amount of carotenoids, which are those reddish orange pigments that are in the foods that they eat. And I was doing some research and I realized that the same carotenoids that are responsible for eventually giving flamingos their color once they've eaten enough foods with the carotenoids are the same pigments that give foods like pumpkin, squash, carrots, give them their orangish, yellowish color. So if flamingos ate lots of pumpkins, they could probably stay pink as well. But they are going to get their carotenoids from the foods that they're going to be eating in these shallow waters. So, of course, the most famous example we think of is shrimp. It's not going to be the kinds of shrimp that we eat, and that's a joke that I make very often with guests when I'm doing the flamingo feeding with them. Is I joke that we feed them like shrimp cereal. So, of course, we don't want anyone with shrimp allergies to come in, and usually I'll tell an adult like, oh, it's, this is condensed kind of shrimp that we're giving them. And they get really excited. They're like, that sounds great. I love shrimp. And so it's not going to be the shrimps that we think of that we're going to eat at Red Lobster on the weekend and dip in butter. These are going to be brine shrimp that are much, much smaller, look very different than the shrimp that we're used to eating. And they're going to be smaller in size, so much easier for the flamingos to filter through their beaks. So the brine shrimp, as well as other crustaceans, mollusks, they will eat small insects. They'll also eat red algae that, again, is going to have that high content of those carotenoids, as well as blue-green algae in some areas. And flamingos are actually responsible for preventing overgrowth of those blue-green algae in certain areas. So they do kind of give back to those water habitats in many ways, including by eating that blue-green algae. And so the process of feeding for a flamingo is also very unique. They are called filter feeders, and so that means that their beaks and mouths essentially serve as a filtration system. So what they do is they will take in sort of a big gulp of water that's going to have, could have anywhere from 10 to 20, more shrimp or insects or whatever is going to be in the water that they're trying to get the food from. They're going to ingest that water, and then inside their beaks, on their top and lower bit of their beaks or jaw, mandible, whatever have you, are going to be lots and lots of these little kind of comb-like membranes called lamellae. Liam's a lot better at pronouncing these things than I am. Lamellae, we'll say it like that. So there are these comb-like bristles that when the flamingo closes its jaw are going to come together, and this action pushes the water out of the beak so that only the solid foods are actually going to be retained in their mouth and then swallowed. Because if the flamingos have to swallow a big gulp of water every time that they're trying to ingest small bits of food that are going to be in that water, they're going to get very full very quickly, and so they're not going to be able to get the most for their money, if you will. They're not going to be able to ingest enough food to keep them, energized before they get too full of that water. So whenever we do our flamingo feeding here at the zoo, I always tell kids, like, push your sleeves up because your hands are going to get messy because you're so up close with the animal. And they I'm not sure exactly what the number is for Caribbean flamingos, but general studies on flamingos estimate that pumping action where the water is pumped out of their mouths because of their mandible being closed and those bristles coming together and pushing out the water, within 1 second, that pumping action can occur 20 times. So it's very fast, it's very efficient. And so when you're holding the cup and the flamingo's dipping its beak in, I mean, your hands are shaking, just the pure action of those flamingos eating. Water splashing everywhere. It's really cool to see the water kind of coming out of those beaks. And it's just really, it's really such a unique and very meaningful experience to see. If your local zoo doesn't offer, a flamingo feeding experience, I definitely recommend looking it up online. It's very unique, and it's always super fun to talk about. And it also is a great way to talk about sort of protecting their habitats. How big is the splash zone, volunteer David asks? You're not going to get splashed from across from a few feet away. So we have a gazebo, essentially, that our guests take part in for the feeding. And I'd say it's maybe I'm so bad at measurement, maybe like a 7x7 gazebo. That sounds about right? 7x7, yeah. Like if I laid down, there'd be a few feet. I'm 5 feet, so I'm like, if I lay down in the gazebo, I'd have about 7x7. That's my estimate. 7x7 feet. All right. So it's about a 7x7 foot gazebo. And I'd say the only splash zone is really going to be within 6 inches, half a foot of the flamingo, who actually will come up to the gate around the gazebo and eat. So if I'm holding, this is my Dr. Pepper, but imagine it's a flamingo cup. If I'm holding it like this and the flamingo's feeding, I'm really only going to get splashed, my hands and maybe a little bit up my forearm. Now, if you're really leaning in, obviously we ask guests not to get too close. We don't want to scare the flamingo. We don't want to try to touch them. But, if you're like kind of really watching, it's, you might get some water on your shirt. Little kids especially, they'll get water up their arms and on their shirts. And some little kids, as soon as they start getting wet, will just like freak out and run off. They're not having it. But most folks are fine with it once I tell them it's going to happen. And of course, we provide paper towels for them to dry off afterwards. So it's not a super big splash zone, but is very unique and fun. But it does leave the guests smelling like shrimp a little bit afterwards, which sometimes they enjoy, sometimes they don't so much. So I love, especially like I was saying, with young kids, especially, it's a great opportunity to bring in ties to their conservation, because one of the biggest threats to these flamingos are going to be microplastics and other very, very, very small pieces of trash getting into that water that they're then going to ingest to try to get their food. And so, when kids are feeding, I can kind of say, now you've seen how flamingos eat, what are some ways we can protect their habitats? And lots of kids immediately pick up on the fact of, I don't want any of the trash, that I'm going to be using, throwing away today, or any of those microplastics to be getting into the water. It'll make flamingos sick. So it's a very easy connection to make, and a great way to tie in conservation messages with talking to guests. Other ways that we talk about conservation with guests, especially now, We still have lots of guests, and I myself, when I'm facilitating the experience, do wear a mask. And I like to tell folks to make sure they cut the loops that go around your ears. Make sure you're cutting those before you throw them away, because in the same way that those plastic wraps around soda cans were famous, for make sure you're cutting your soda can tops before you throw them away, because it can get wrapped around birds' necks or feet, and it can harm birds in the wild. We're seeing that same thing with masks. Those loops can get tied around any bird, flamingo bird, any bird, especially when it ends up in sort of these watersheds, these water habitats. They can get caught around their beaks and their feet. So very important to make sure we're doing that. But that's kind of really the flamingo habitat or flamingo diet in a GIF for you. David, you are here. I did want to show you. I didn't get a lot of information because I couldn't find any of the reptile animal care staff, but I did sneak over to the reptile house on my break to get a few pictures of the baby Komodos. So they were like all snoozing in the tree, so I didn't get very great ones, but there's two of them cuddling here. Oh, so cute. Now, what I do know about the Komodo dragons that are kind of in habitat on display for guests is that all the babies are about 6 months old. They are, according to the herpetology manager, all female. Although he told me it doesn't really matter if they are male or female at this young age. It doesn't really matter, but they are, to our knowledge, all female. So Liam is the reptile expert. Hopefully he can provide you all some more updates when he's here next weekend. But since you asked about the Komodos, I would say, half of it was I wanted to be able to get those photos for you. Half of it was also I'm selfish and I wanted to go see the baby Komodos. So thank you for giving me an excuse to do that, David. And welcome, Raging Rhino. We were just talking about Flamingo Diet today, which essentially comes down to talking about filter feeding and really emphasizing and using education about Flamingo Diet as a way to tie into the reasons we need to protect them. So especially keeping microplastics out of waters. Some other ways you can help flamingos and ways that we try to engage the local community with about protecting flamingos is thinking about things like your cell phones and trying to really make sure we're keeping our pieces of technology for as long as possible. So as tempting as it can be to want to buy a new iPhone every time a new one comes out. I don't know about you. I can't afford to do that for one thing, but that's a lot to keep up with. And transferring all your contacts and photos every time, so stressful. So keeping your phones, your computers, your tablets, all of these pieces of technology, keeping those for as long as possible, recycling them responsibly, buying them secondhand so that more don't need to be produced. This is going to be a very, very crucial way to protect these, not only flamingos, but lots of animals who live in these water aquatic habitats, because it's not lithium. Oh shoot, I forgot the name of it now, of course. But there is a resource. I can't believe I forgot it. There's a resource. No, it is lithium. I think it's lithium mining. No, I'm not so sure. Don't quote me on it. I think it's lithium. Yes, because lithium batteries. Okay, I think I'm right. Sorry, I didn't have coffee. I'm trying to get my caffeine from this Dr. Pepper, but it's not really doing much for me. So it is lithium batteries. Lithium mining is a big threat to flamingos and other aquatic species, because one of the ways we get lithium is through draining the waters where these animals live so that we can mine the lithium out of their natural habitats. And the reason that humans keep mining for lithium is because the demand for lithium for electric cars, our cell phone batteries, our batteries for our other electronics, the more we consume, the more of that demand there's going to be, the more, or I guess the less companies are going to care about the effect it's going to have on the habitats, because it's going to be making them so much money. So yes, keeping your electronics for as long as you can, buying them secondhand when you need new ones, that is going to keep them, keep the flamingos safer who live in those habitats where lithium is mined for. And if you're like me and you're, lazy about getting your things recycled, and you have a bunch of old cell phones sitting in your desk drawer at home, I will say the easiest places to kind of take these to be recycled responsibly are going to be Best Buy, Office Max, Staples, places like those. I would check the websites before you go to make sure that your local companies kind of do still have those recycling programs. And some zoos, even, I know the Houston Zoo, when I visited, did have in their gorilla habitat, or sort of the viewing point area for guests, they did have a bed where you could throw your cell phone batteries away, because that mining for lithium does also affect other species like gorillas. And if you all didn't know this, the San Antonio Zoo just announced last week or 2 weeks ago that we are in the process, or going to be starting the process soon, of building a gorilla exhibit here at the zoo. So I'm sure we are going to try to implement that program. David just says the Toronto Zoo has a phone apes program, recycling program, to recycle the coltan ore used in phones. Okay, so coltan for the gorillas. Lithium is going to be more so for these aquatic habitats. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's going to be it's the same program that we're hopefully going to be using for the recycling of those electronics. So love when conservation and recycling is made easy for you. There's a local company in San Antonio that I use to compost, because it's not offered at the community where I live, and you can either kind of pay to get the password to go to the actual place and hand your compost over to them, and they'll do the rest for you, or you can pay an extra $5 a month and they'll just come pick up your bins for you. And like I told you before, I'm pretty lazy, so I opt for the they come to your house and pick it up program. But always really cool. Definitely look for opportunities to be more sustainable in your community, especially when you can help support small businesses. So that's all I have on the topic of Flamingo Diet today. But if you have any other questions, do please leave them in the chat. Let me check what the weather is so I can give you all an update. I know it's a Saturday. We usually get between about 3,000 to 5,000 on a normal weekend day. But it's currently 42 degrees in San Antonio, which for Texans is like practically below freezing. Not too many guests here today, but thanks. Special shout out to our animal care staff who are here 365 days a year, even when the rest of the state of Texas is completely shut down because there's a freeze. Our animals are our number one priority. So they are here, they're out and about, staying bundled up, but making sure that all of our animals are very healthy. So shout out to them today. Oh, we might be able to get a close-up look at the flamingo feeding here if I can zoom in. Now, I did see a question earlier in the chat, and I'm sorry I missed it at the time, but the question was whether those bands on their legs, and let me see if I can find one, whether those bands on their legs bother them. And the answer to that is no. They are not tight on there, so it's not going to constrict the blood flow through the leg or anything at all. But as soon as the flamingo is old enough to have one, there's Randy. He's one of our tallest flamingos, and I recognize him right away because he's the only one with a white band in this habitat, and his number's 3 here, so we can zoom in. So if you look, you can see that band is really, it's not tightly bound to his leg, so there's room certainly between the leg and sort of the perimeter of that band, so it's not going to be constricting blood flow. It's not going to be affecting movement at all. The reason they have these bands, it's not just the San Antonio Zoo that has them, but any zoo that takes part in the species survival plan. We're going to be having these bands on our animals so that we can identify who they are as individuals. So this, like I said, is Randy. I know that because I don't have every flamingo name and number memorized, but I know this is Randy because he's the only one with that number, and I see him quite frequently. But basically, if we ever needed to pull in an individual flamingo for a checkup, if we needed to do blood draws, things of that nature, obviously we want to know who each individual is so that their animal care staff can routinely check on their weight, see if they've gained weight, lost weight. During breeding season, the animal care staff will monitor sort of who's mated, who's laying eggs, so that we know who the parents of the eggs are, all of those things of that nature. If we send a flamingo from our zoo to another zoo, we want to know which individual we're losing. We want to make sure they're going to be genetically a good genetic pair for those other flamingos. So all of those things are the reasons why the animals have the bands. And the leg is just, for us, a species like a bird, obviously, that's going to be the most comfortable and easy place to have that on them. So I always tell people, when you're watching Zoo Life, when you're in our habitat here, you can look at the bird's leg to determine if it is a San Antonio Zoo bird or if it's a wild Texas bird, like many of our mallards here. Like Kevin. Kevin doesn't have a number on his leg because he doesn't belong to us. He's not a full-time resident at the San Antonio Zoo officially, although he practically has become one by now. So this is a swan goose. I'm not sure how easily we'll be able to see their bands, but the swan geese here are animals that we care for. So so they do have the band as well. So that's just an easy kind of cheat sheet way for you to see if it is a bird that lives here at the zoo or if it is a wild bird. But as I was saying earlier, we can, look at that. Did you all see that? You see this bird resting there? I don't want to assume if it's male or female. but they were just resting their neck on the back of that other flamingo. I wonder what that was. If that was like a mating, like a courtship behavior, like, hi, I think you're cute. That's so interesting. And now they're going their separate ways. Oh, that was so interesting. You always see something new, even when you're an educator. You've been working here all this long time. So here are some flamingos here eating. So they are going to be eating again. They're small bits of grain, and you can see. Okay, so you can see that the water kind of dripping from that flamingo. So I want to zoom in here really close to see if we can get. Oh my gosh, look at these little whistling ducks trying to like crane their necks to get the food. That is so cute. So what is happening here? So you'll see the flamingo dip his beacon, and then what they immediately do is they grab a piece of that food and then they put their heads in the water, because what they're doing is they're putting the dry grain in their mouth, and then they're going to scoop the water up, because if we put the food kind of directly in the water every day, it's just going to get messy eventually. So what is done is that their grain, which is going to be kind of the concentrated shrimp, brine shrimp, algae, all those other things that give them those carotenoids, they're going to be put in that bucket, and then it's on top of the water, so that the flamingos can immediately dip their beaks into the water, and then the filter feeding can progress. So that's what's going on here. And as you can see, yes, sometimes the wild ducks and geese manage to get in and steal some flamingo food as well. So lots of these ducks that are those little brown ducks with the very orange beaks are whistling ducks, and there are so many of them in the flamingo habitat, and they're so funny to watch. But there you go. You can see, right up close exactly how that filter feeding is working, and exactly how the animals here at the Flamingo Zoo, my goodness, at the San Antonio Zoo, are able to take part in that natural behavior. So I think I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you all so much for joining our talks today. Sorry that Liam couldn't join us today, but he is at home staying warm. So I hope you didn't mind 2 talks from me. Next week, we're going to be talking about lion diet, which I talked about pretty intensely last week already, because most interspecies behaviors in lions involves eating. So I'll be trying to cover a bit more than we talked about last week as well. And we are going to be chatting about the okapis next week, since we couldn't talk about them today. I'm guessing that saliva isn't a big part of the flamingo swallowing. That's a really good question. Yeah, in all the reading that I've done about flamingo diet and filter feeding, it has never mentioned their saliva. So I'm not sure. That's a great question. I'm just not really sure what the role of that is, if birds secrete saliva in the same way that mammals do. Really, the only things that are mentioned as kind of facilitating the filter feeding is going to be, again, those lamellae, those like comb-like bristles on their mouths that are going to be pushed together, pushing the water out. And also their tongues are very, have like these very small bristles on them that help, again, to retain that food. So I can't answer yes or no to that, David. It's a wonderful question. Definitely worth looking into. So if, the role of saliva, not only in filter feeding animals, but birds in general. Very interesting question. So I'll definitely be thinking about that. Maybe looking it up for our next flamingo talk. So yes, next weekend we will be doing okapi and lion diet. So I hope to see you all there. Have a great rest of your weekend. Stay warm if it's cold where you are right now, like it is here. And thank you again so much for helping the San Antonio Zoo secure their mission, or achieve their mission of securing a future for wildlife. I'm going to go get some caffeine now, because clearly I am caffeine deprived. So have a great one. I'll see you all next time. Bye.